Stephen King, a name synonymous with modern horror literature globally for decades now. There was perhaps not a lull period for King's adaptation or derivative of his impressive bibliography on the big and small screens. Beside the box office success of adaptations like Andy Muschietti's It and Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep, there were many recent adaptations of King's books and novellas on Netflix, including Gerald's Game, 1922, In the Tall Grass, and Mr. Harrigan's Phone. There was even The Boogeyman from director Rob Savage in 2023, based on the short story of the same name. In 2024, James Wan's Atomic Monster Studio, together with Vertigo Entertainment, New Line Cinema, and Warner Brothers, had a third bite on cherry with Stephen King's 1975 vampire novel, Salem's Lot. This was a story of an author, Ben Mears, returning to his hometown of Jerusalem's Lot, a fictitious town in Maine, and started writing about an abandoned and forgotten house called Marston's House, where young Ben saw a ghost, and he attempted to uncover the truth behind the brick and mortar where a hitman had resided. Mears' plan to stay inside the house during his writing was met with the obstacle of it had already been occupied by business partners Straker and Barlow, who opened an antique shop in town and had been sketchy, especially only Straker could be seen in person. As the people in town had the same reservation towards Ben Mears, especially the local sheriff, scary things started to creep out of the woodworks. In preparation of watching this version of Salem's Lot, directed by Gary Dauberman, I also caught up with the original adaptation from 1979, which was a two-part miniseries for CBS by a relative unknown called Tobe Hooper. Director Hooper, of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist fame, had time to let the story breathe, and as audience, it was easier to get acquainted with the people in Salem's Lot by acknowledging the dynamics between characters and able to gain more sympathy to the victims, especially the younger ones. For sure, the movie looked dated at this point, and the second act was a bit of a drag, but when the chaos ensued, it was a non-stop wild ride, and I was engulfed in the sentimentality with fates befell on certain characters. I loved the gothic feel of the interior of the Marston house, and the change of scenery to Guatemala for the bookends of the movie was interesting. There were of course those scary sequences that scarred many young minds, which many horror fans still cited to these very days. In the 2024 version, which ran at a much digestible 113 minutes, Dauberman used his discretion to make some key alterations with the characters, removing a few side characters and even merged some of them. I was not totally sure how loyal to the source materials either the 1979 series or this contemporary movie were, but I thought Dauberman's liberty with his screenplay took away some of the key characters' dynamics. Ben Mears' love interest Susan, her family and their motives were totally different from the 1979 version. I was not holding the original film as sacred, but it was strange to see Dauberman altered so drastically but creating a wild card for a much changed climatic showdown. It was intriguing at the very least. When I stated that the 1979 series looked dated, I felt some creative choices by Dauberman and his team also seems very dated in their filmmaking. In a key scene at the graveyard, with its colored palette and the cranking up of the fog machine, I thought I was transposed to one of those Twilight movies. Meanwhile, a lot of the backdrops felt very generic James Wan's productions, such as Malignant and Insidious, and the modern Marston house was nothing special at all, which was a shame. While some of the more memorable scary scenes were recreated, such as the Ralphie return, the Patrice massacre, and the above mentioned graveyard scene, in terms of the mood, the novelty, and execution, none could really hold a candle to the original adaptation. The sense of doom lingering with the spread of vampirism in the 1979 version was something that drove the TV series, especially the final act. In this version, the impending doom was very much in your face and lacked subtlety. Director Gary Dauberman was a screenwriter James Wan had known very well, creating stories for the extended Conjuring universe, starting with the 2014's Annabelle and then the subsequent sequels, with himself directing Annabelle Comes Home in 2019. He also provided screenplay for The Nun in 2018. Dauberman also had joy translating Stephen King's work for the big screen adaptations, writing the screenplay of the 2017's It and the sequel Chapter 2. Since he had been chaperoned by producer James Wan for the 2 movies he directed so far, the influence from Wan was evidently felt. Speaking of It, the one with Pennywise, it was interesting to note that Jerusalem's Lot was part of a trinity of fictional Maine town by Stephen King, together with Derry and Castle Rock, which were settings for some of the scariest phenomena and events in King's universe and were constantly being brought up again in King's subsequent stories. We have a Pullman fighting off evil forces with a young African American lad. And no, we were not talking about Independence Day from Roland Emmerich. Bill Pullman's son, Louis, was in the starring role of Ben Mears. Although he had nicer hair than David Soul from the 1979 version, he just lacked that bit of gravitas, and I kind of hated myself bending Louis Pullman together with another second-generation actor, Wyatt Russell, perhaps the physical endowment, perhaps not convinced with their leading actor, energy and acting. I'm willing to have my impression for both young actors change eventually. Supporting Pullman was a cast of brilliant character actors, like Bill Camp as his teacher Matt, William Sadler as Sheriff Gillespie, John Benjamin Hickey as Father Callahan, and Alfred Woodard as Dr. Cody. Woodard's involvement naturally makes sense of how her character had a much meatier role in this version of the story. I do like Father Callahan having a more prominent role in this adaptation of Salem's Lot. While Straker in 1979 series was a conniving English gentleman, the Straker, played here by Danish actor Pilou Asbæk, who was Euron Greyjoy in the Game of Thrones, worked well even before we saw the big evil. Salem's Lot started production in 2021 and was stifled in its release multiple times due to a myriad of reasons such as the pandemic, clash with other horror movies release, and then the 2023 Writers Guild strike. Ultimately, it was chucked on Warner Brothers' Max streaming service as an exclusive premium content. I had been encouraged to do this movie review by my buddy on the Lights Out Ghost Stories channel, claiming that it was the best horror film he watched this year. Sadly, I could not give this version of Salem's Lot anything more than 6 upon 10. Continue to like and share this video, and subscribe to this channel, and perhaps you can make a request of what horror movies I should review next. My last review was on JT Moner's Strange Darling. Now excuse me as I'm locking the windows of my bedroom and reinforcing it with electrical fans and hanging up some garlic and crosses just in case.